What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. In today's training, we're going to take a look at how you can break text into multiple columns without the use of Flexbox or CSS Grid. This is a really useful, very powerful technique, and it's actually very easy to implement. Now, because it is so easy, look, I've put time aside to record a tutorial for you. I don't want it to be a 5-minute tutorial. So I want to take some extra time. I want to go into detail on things like workflow and best practices when implementing a technique like this, because we need to talk about scalability of a full website build, not just taking an isolated technique and here's how you slap it onto a paragraph of text. Let's talk about how you would implement a technique like this on a full website build to ensure scalability and future proofing. So we need to talk about some of the concepts related to CSS, utility classes, custom classes, naming conventions, things like that. We're going to go a little bit slower in this tutorial. We're going to make sure that all of the beginners out there can follow along, but I truly think that everybody is going to get tremendous value from this episode. So let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to screen share with you. Before we do anything, I want to just take a look at the sample page that I've put together here that we're going to be working with. It's like a pretty decent looking page, but it's not finished yet. It would actually look a lot better. I mean, this section for sure is not finished. It would look a lot better if, for example, this giant wall of text was broken into two easy to read paragraphs that are side by side, or not two paragraphs, but two columns that are side by side. It would be nice if, for example, this list was two columns side by side. And I really want to see what it would be like if this was broken into three columns. And I think that would improve readability a lot and just the general structure and layout of the page. Now, one thing is we don't want to use Flexbox and we don't want to use Grid, because when you use Flexbox or Grid, you actually have to physically break these elements into multiple elements, and then they become somewhat unmanageable. Whenever you have long text like this, you want the text to naturally flow from one column to the next column. And if you break them physically and use Flexbox or Grid to structure them, they won't naturally flow from one to the other. If you add content to one column, you're going to have to subtract some and move it. And it becomes a nightmare for actually managing the content on the page. But if you use a technique like what I'm going to show you, you don't run into this issue. Now, let's talk about workflow. Let's talk about scalability. Let's talk about CSS and applying techniques like this. If you're not going to use the exact same style or the exact same design of an element over and over and over again, then implementing a technique like this would best be done with utility classes. I'm pretty much against styling these things at the ID level. I would recommend you're either going to use utility classes, which are classes created for one specific purpose, and you can just quickly drop them onto elements and get the effect that you're looking for and then move on, or global control is with custom classes. You create custom classes so that you have global control. Now, that happens when you have an element that you are going to be reusing over and over and over again, and you need the styling to be identical, and you need one source of truth for that styling. So if we scroll down to this section as an example, and let's say that this is a component, basically. It's like a product card, and this product card has a heading, and it has a description, and then it has this list of features. And let's say we're going to use this product card on multiple pages across the website. So we might end up having, by the time a website build is done, there could be 30, 40, 50 of these little product feature cards, and they all have one of these little lists in them. And I need to be able to make sure that all of those lists are styled exactly the same. And if that styling ever needs to change, I have one source of truth where I can make those changes, and then those changes apply to everywhere I've used that card. That is very, very important when you're doing website builds. Now, if we come down here, this is another example of just a one-off, hey, I want 3 columns of text. I'm not going to use this exact same styling somewhere else. I just need 3 columns of text for this particular section. Then popping on some utility classes would be really good here. So I'm going to show you both methods. I'm going to show you the method of creating a custom class and applying this type of styling. And then I'm going to show you what it actually takes if we were going to develop some utility classes for these other areas up here. Now, yes, For sure, it's the fastest method to just take on the ID here to go to advanced and custom CSS and write some custom CSS and break this into 2 columns and then move on with your life. But it's not really scalable, and it's not quick if you have utility classes already prepared for you. Maybe you're using a framework like Automatic CSS, or you've prepared your own utility classes. If you've already have utility classes at your disposal, then absolutely it's easier, it's faster to just use utility classes. So instead of doing, and again, scalability, future-proofing, think about what you're doing here with building websites. If you're going to build more websites, if this is the only website that you're building, then it behooves you. It's a huge benefit to have utility classes at your disposal, whether you create those or you get them inside of a framework like Automatic CSS, because even though you can style it quickly at the ID level right here, and now you're going to have to do that same exact work again and again and again and again and again on every site that you need to do this technique with, right? Better to just have utility classes that are always at your disposal so you can do them. So yes, utility classes take a little bit more work up front, but over the long run, they make your life faster, easier, more consistent, simpler, and so on and so forth. Especially if those utility classes are just given to you in a framework like ACSS. So we're not going to do anything at the ID level here. We're either going to create utility classes or we're going to create a custom class for this styling. We're going to start with the custom class because that is probably the easiest, most straightforward way to begin, and it's the way that we'll get to the technique the quickest, okay? So let's take a look at my structure here. We've got a section, and then inside of that section, we have a card. Now, it's a fairly large card. It's got a lot going on, right? But nevertheless, it's a card that I want to be able to use everywhere. And we're going to call this a product feature card. It is giving us the features related to a specific product. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to create a custom class on this entire thing, not just on the list that I want to style, but the entire thing, because what I want to introduce to you is a concept called BEM. And I'll probably do an entire video on BEM. It's BEM. It stands for Block Element Modifier. And it's basically a philosophy for creating custom classes. One thing I see, huge error and issue that I see with beginners is they create custom classes, right? They know not to style at the ID level, but they create custom classes that have no semantic meaning or improper semantic meaning. For example, if they wanted to break this into 2 columns, they would come up with some sort of class like intro text, right? And then they would apply the styling to intro text. They would break this into 2 columns. And then when they come down here, they're like, well, you know what? I actually want the same 2 columns. Maybe they don't want 3 columns like I mentioned earlier. They just want 2. And they're like, oh, I already have a class for that. And they pop on the intro text class. I'm not going to actually do it, but they pop on the same intro text class because they know that's where they put their styling for 2 columns. But guys, this is not intro text, right? You're using a semantically inaccurate class right here. In fact, nobody knows what intro text means. They don't know that that breaks things into 2 columns, right? That doesn't make any sense. So think about this. And I know if you're not working with a team, you're like, well, who cares what other people think? Because it's just me, Kevin. There's a 6-month rule. It could be a 3-month rule. It depends on your brain and your memory. But let's say this. You build a site. I'm sure you've had this happen to you. You build a site and then you're finished with it. You move on to the next project. You're working on another project. Then you're working on another project. 6 months goes by. Old client comes up like, hey, we want to make some changes, some additions to our website. Come on back, do some more work for us. You're like, hey, no problem. You go in, you load up that old site, and then you need to break something into columns and you're like, what was that class again? Or you look at the class that's on something, and you're like, intro text, what does that even do? This isn't even intro text. What does that even mean? What was I doing? What was I thinking, right? You get into those situations all the time. They're a massive waste of time. They're a massive waste of brain power. And it's just wrong. It's just bad, right? Some things are just wrong and some things are just bad. Don't do that as a practice. Use semantically accurate names. If you follow the BEM methodology, which Automatic CSS follows, by the way, you are able to keep your classes insanely organized, and they're all semantically accurate, which means, and check this out, because it's BEM, Block Element Modifier, you can actually look at a class name and know exactly what block it belongs to and what element it belongs to and how it's being modified, and pretty much you know exactly what's going on just by looking at the name of a class. So that's what I want to show you right here. Very, very important technique for you to start implementing if you're not implementing it already. So here's your product feature card. That's what we're going to call it. So we're going to say product feature card. This is the block. Okay, now the block has elements inside of it. One element is a heading. Another element is this body text. And another element is our list. And of course, we have a button as well. Buttons are less important because they tend to be the same across the website no matter what. But what you would want to do, even though we're not going to style these at all right now, you would want to come in and you would want to apply custom classes to these elements too. This gives you control, global control, over all elements of this block, right? You might think, well, I don't need to do anything to it right now, but right now doesn't matter. The future is what matters, because once you duplicate this 700 times, you can't then decide, oh, now I need global control over those things, right? You got to know this ahead of time and you have to plan accordingly. So I know that I need global control over this at some point. So I'm going to go ahead and type product feature card. And then in BIM, the way you do this element side of it is a double underscore. So all of these things are nested basically under product feature card. So this is just going to be a heading. So it's product feature card heading, right? And then I come down here and this is going to be product feature card double underscore body, right? So it's the body of the card. And then this is going to be the list. So product feature card list. And again, guys, I'm going into this detail because I want you to learn best practices. I don't want you to just try to whip things up as fast as possible. I want you to be thinking about the future and scalability and organization and becoming a better dev, right? Becoming a better developer. So here's product feature card list. And then here's another trick for you. And I'll go into this more detail when I get to the actual BIM training later on in the future. But you can do product feature card button, even though you're not even going to do anything with it, right? But that gives you some fallback power, which I'll explain in a different tutorial. Okay, so we've set up our structure. Oh, wait, I missed something, right? This image right here, product feature card image. See how everything is super organized and I know what goes with what? It's all great. All right. So now I'm going to come down and we're going to actually do this technique on the list. And we're going to split this list into 2 columns. And then you're going to see that the design, the layout of this list actually breaks because lists have default styling on them. They have default margin, default padding. I'm going to show you how to inspect elements so that you can figure out what's gone wrong with them in order to then go and fix them. And I'm going to take my time on the CSS part. I'm going to write it very slowly. So for those of you who are scared of CSS or you don't really understand how CSS works yet, you're going to be able to pick up some things as well. All right, so what I'm going to do, first thing is we're going to talk about where to put this code. Here's where you should not put the code. You should not go into advanced custom CSS and write it here. In fact, you've probably seen me do that in some of my tutorials, and I've actually gone back on this technique, and I've decided I'm not going to do this anymore going forwards, and I've actually informed my team, we've updated our SOPs, that if you're going to write custom code, you don't nest them inside of individual elements in Oxygen. Surely you can see where there might be a problem with this. When somebody comes back 6 months from now, let's go to the 6-month rule, and they're like, where's that code, right? Well, they got to look in style sheets, or they got to look here, or they got to look in the actual builder fields, or they got to look in custom selectors. There's 4 different places that code can live, all right? That's a problem because people are just spending all day poking around trying to find things. I've told my team, look, we're not going to go up and create custom selectors just so we can style things in Oxygen. We're not doing that. We're not going to nest code inside of the custom CSS in a module. If you're writing custom CSS, it goes in a style sheet, period. There's actually 5 ways. You could actually put custom CSS in a code block on a page, okay? So we're doing everything in style sheets. So I'm going to go over here to style sheets and I'm going to open my style sheets. And what's great about the style sheets area is that you can keep everything super organized, right? You can create a style sheet for pretty much everything. It all gets combined at the end of the day. It's good to go. So I'm going to add a style sheet and you can call this products. You can call it product card. You can call it whatever you want to, right? If you want to put all of your product styling together, you can do that there. I'm just going to do product card. Oh, I can't type today. Okay, so product card, just like that. And then another best practice I would recommend, let me zoom way in here, is I would create a little comment, put your name, and then put your agency as well. So everybody knows who wrote this CSS, and if it goes wrong, who they need to contact, and to figure it out, if they have any questions about it, whatnot. Okay, so now what we're doing, we're looking at this little list over here, which I know everything is gigantic because I zoomed in a lot, but we are going to target that list. And because I don't have some erroneous class name, right, I know exactly how to target it. It's product feature card _list. It's the list inside of the product feature card. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the curly braces. So all I'm doing here is targeting a class with CSS. The class is sitting right here on this list. So now what I'm going to do is the actual technique that you've been waiting for, that you've been dying for. You're like, Kevin, get to the technique already. Quit talking. Best practices are important. All right, we got to cover them. But anyway, product feature card list. It's so easy, guys. This is so easy. All right, so we're going to create columns. Yes. So we're going to say column count, and then we get to put a number, 2. Look, you can see right away it is broken into 2 columns. You can also control the gap between columns with column gap. And we're going to do a column gap of maybe 2em on this, or we can do 1.5em. Now let's talk about ems versus rems versus clamps versus VH and VW and CH and all these different units. When you're doing something small like this relative to text size, I prefer to use em units if you're not using clamps. Now, I wouldn't use clamp here unless I was using a utility class that already had clamp in it, like a gap class from automatic CSS or something, because they're hard to manage and they require fallbacks. But right here, like I just need a little spacing, like 1.5 relative to the text size, 1.5em is a perfect unit to use here. If that text ever got bigger, the gap would get a little bit bigger because the em units are relative to the font size versus rem is not relative to the font size. It would stay 1.5 regardless. Okay, so there you go with the technique. Column count 2, column gap 1.5em. Now don't abandon the video here like, ooh, I got the technique. There's more to cover. We're going to talk about how to rule these columns, how to make sure that they're automatically responsive, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But first, what I want to do is I want to fix this styling problem. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. We're going to go to the front end, and we're going to take a look at what the problem actually is. So I'm going to exit to front end, and I'm going to scroll down. Everything's gigantic because we're zoomed in. All right, I'm going to right click. Whenever you have something going wrong and you're like, what is happening? You have to inspect it. So you're going to right click it. You're going to click on the inspect right here. Now, sometimes it's difficult to find out what's going on if you're just looking at this list over here. The first thing I would do is look visually. Let me make sure that those aren't highlighted. By just hovering over one of the elements. This is the LI right here. And you're going to see when I hover over it, I can't like point at my screen because you can't see my finger, but you see it highlights it. And notice it highlights it with one highlight color. That lets you know there's really no styling happening here that you need to be aware of. So if I go up one element to its parent, which is the unordered list, I can now see 3 colors. So I can see the text is one color, the markers, the bullets are in purple, and there's a lot of space being highlighted there. And then the yellow is showing me above and below my list. Those are margins and paddings. And so basically what you're being told here is there's margin and padding at the UL level. The UL has this margin and padding that's throwing off your design. It's indenting the bullets, and then it's bringing the paragraph spacing down at the very beginning, which is throwing off our alignment here. So what we have to do, it's telling us you need to target the unordered list, target the UL, and remove that extra spacing. So what we're going to do is in our style sheet, let me zoom all the way back in here. In our style sheet, we are going to target the UL. Here's how you target the UL. Remember, the UL is part of your product feature card list. So we're going to write product feature card _list space UL. And that targets the unordered list that is inside of that class. All right, so now what we're going to do is just right away, we know, let's just get rid of all margin. I don't need any margins on this list. So I'm going to hit margin 0. And you see right there, it's gone. That first initial margin, the last initial margin, gone. All of my things, all of my elements, my items in my list line up perfectly now. But I don't like the fact that they're indented. So that is being done by padding. So I'm going to show you two different ways to do this. One is padding 0, and that takes all padding away. And you might start here, but you're going to notice another problem. So if I save and go back to the front end, let's take a look at this. Refresh. You're going to see that, oh, look at this. The text is actually in line with the text up here, but the marker is not. The bullet is actually offset to the left. I want the bullets to be in line with this text up here. So what I'm going to do is add some padding back, or not take as much away. So what I'm going to do is actually the longhand version of padding, which is 4 units like this, okay? So the top, it always goes clockwise. The top is where it always starts. So this first number is the top. The next one is the right side. The next one is the bottom. And the next one is the left-hand side. So I want the top to be 0. Don't want any padding top or bottom. I don't want any padding on the right. I don't want any padding on the bottom. On the left, we know 0 doesn't work because that shifts it over too much. I want to try 1em here. And then if I save, we're going to go back to the front end, and you should see that all of this stuff is in alignment now. Look at that. Perfect alignment all the way down with my bullets. But we're not done yet. There's a problem. We need to look at this on mobile. Let me zoom out, go to mobile view, and start to collapse this in, and let's see what happens. Right there, you see it. So notice here, we have a line height issue. It looks like performance because the spacing of the line height is exactly equal to the margin that's on the bottom of these, or really there is no margin. It's line height controlling all of the spacing. Therefore, it almost looks like performance should be its own bullet item, right? And performance here should be its own bullet item, but they shouldn't be. But it looks like visually they should be. It's very hard to decipher which lines go with which bullets, right? So what we have to do is tighten up our line heights. So that's easy to do. We're going to go back and we're going to see if we can do it at the UL level right here. Let me zoom back in. Well, that's too much. So we're going to do line height 1. And it actually can be targeted here at the UL, but you see we immediately have another problem. So now we're going to save. We're going to go back to the front end and refresh. And let's take a look at what our new problem is. Everything is really jumbled together. Because now that the line height is pretty much gone, we don't have any spacing between our bullets anymore. So what we need to do is on an LI, every LI, which is a list item inside of your unordered list, every list item needs some margin on the bottom in order to space it out. So that's no problem, very easy to do. But I can't do it by targeting the unordered list. I have to target a list item. So what I'm going to do is paste that line right there. Did it not copy? Let's try that again. Copy, paste. Okay. And then I'm going to add one more targeting thing, which is an LI. Okay. So now I'm targeting an LI inside of a UL, inside of a product feature card list. And all I have to do here is margin bottom. See, I don't have to do the whole longhand of margin. I know I just need margin on the bottom. And I'm going to do 1em, just like that. And then I'm going to hit save. And now we should have the spacing we had earlier, except we don't have a line height problem. So I refresh. And there you go. And let me take a look at our line height. Maybe like 1.2 would be a little bit better. You can dial this in. So we're going to go back to the front, refresh, and there we go. So we have decent line height now. Like the two lines aren't squished together. They have some spacing, but there's more spacing between list items. So visually, I can actually see what's going on here. All right, so now we need to talk about responsiveness of these this technique, this column count 2 technique. All right, so there's another part of this called column width, right? So column width, if I can type today. And you get to determine what a minimum width for every column of text should be. And if it goes below, if it starts to squish a column below this minimum width, it'll automatically break the columns into like 1. Like, or if it's 3, it goes to 2. If it's 2, it goes to 1. It becomes automatically responsive when you do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play around with some widths. So we're going to try 35 rem here. And I would not suggest using pixels. I've gone into this many times before. Pixels are not accessible. Do your best to use relative units, rems, ems, that kind of stuff, okay? I can see that if I do 35 rem, it's automatically going to break this to 1 column. So we don't want to do that. Maybe we're going to try 25 rem. And then let's see how this actually behaves. Let's go to save. Let's go to our front end, refresh, okay? And let's get out of mobile and let's not zoom in. So there we are. We're going to jump into mobile view, but I want to come out here to desktop and I want to see exactly where this breaks. So I'm going to come down. Oh, it broke a little early. Let me see how once the columns actually break. Now it's back to 2 and then it goes to 1. So that's actually not bad. That's actually not bad at all. I could maybe do like 20 rem on here. I don't know how much that's actually going to matter, but let's just go ahead and take a look. So you guys see that my minimum width, if I go out here, my minimum width is not taking effect. But as I come in, yeah, okay, there we go. So it actually left it as 2 columns, which I don't mind that. There's really no problem there. Let's see when it actually decides to break it. There it is. So like on a basically a phone view, like that would be the S breakpoint most likely. Maybe the M breakpoint, probably the S breakpoint. It decides to break it to 1 column. Maybe we'll go in the middle there. We'll go like 22 rem and we'll just leave it at that. Okay, so I have broken this text, and here's the greatest thing about this. Look, guys, this is a rich text element. I can now add, doesn't matter how many more bullets I add, and I hit save, it maintains this 2-column layout. I don't have to shift things from one column to another and play with the grids and play with Flexbox and all that stuff. It simply takes one element of text like this and breaks, if I remove things, breaks them into 2 basically equal columns. Right now, it looks like I have an odd number of items, but if I had an even number of items, save and close, it would be perfectly even columns, but it keeps things, regardless of how many items there are, nice and balanced for you. And we've just done this on a custom class. So let me show you why we're doing this at a custom class level. Actually, let me pop one more technique in there for you so you get some extra value in this training. So look at this. I'm going to go back to my product card. I would actually like those markers to be my site's primary color because they look better that way. All right. So what I'm going to do is on this LI, I'm actually going to highlight this line. Ooh, let me zoom in. Everybody yells at me when I forget to zoom in. So let me zoom in. I'm going to come down here, product feature LI, ;: marker. And this is going to allow you to quickly and easily style the markers, the bullets, okay? And I'm just going to do color, and then I'm going to do var primary, which is a variable from automatic CSS for my website's primary color. And I want to take another minute to talk about ease and scalability here, right? You can absolutely do this in a number of ways. You could say red. You could use a hex code. Maybe you know the hex code in your head. I don't know, you're like a dev genius. You memorize all your clients' hex codes. So you put a hex code in here and it changes the color of the marker. Or you're like, nah, I got to use variables. And you know that in Oxygen, there's global colors. And you're like, well, I can access those global colors by using the color function. And I just put in the ID of the color, and then I'm going to get it. The problem is, this is not semantically accurate. There's actually no semantic data here whatsoever. What is a color 1? There's no such, like, what does that mean to anybody? 6-month rule. 6-month rule. You come back in 6 months, you're going to know what colors you need to use? No, you're going to have to waste time popping out of here, going into Oxygen Global Settings, looking at the ID of the color that you need, coming back here, referencing the color, and then when you need another color, you're going to have to do it again. You're going to have to go back to Global Settings, find the other color you need, reference the ID, come back, put it in a color function, use it again, yada, 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 right? Or you use semantically accurate names. And like in automatic CSS, I know, hey, if I need my website's primary color, it's var primary, I'm done, I move on with my life. There's no referencing anything. It's semantically accurate. It's exactly what it says. If I want the light version of primary, I add light to it. If I want the medium version of primary, I add medium to it. If I want my hover version, I add hover to it. There's nothing I have to look up or remember. Like it's the same from site to site to site, and it's all semantically accurate. So just another little tidbit for you. So product feature card list ULLI marker is now the primary color. Let's go check out how that looks. And I think you're going to agree, probably looks a lot better. Yeah, it does, right? It looks better when the marker is not the same color as the text. And when you get the brand color working in there, it looks a lot better. All right, so let's talk about this scalability issue. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this section right here. Let's copy this. Let me zoom out. I'm going to come down all the way to the end. And well, let's delete this one. I was doing another tutorial and it failed because my screen capture failed. And that was from that. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this new one in. I want you to pretend for a minute. Pretend that this is on a different page. Pretend that there are 500 of these cards, right? That we've used all throughout this gigantic website. And then the client comes along and they're like, Kevin, I hate to break this to you, man. I know how hard you've worked on this site. I know we already went over this. We looked at wireframes. We looked at a UI. We approved everything. But unfortunately, we've decided that we don't want this to be 2 columns anymore. And we want that marker to be our website's accent color. Man, I hope this isn't too much work for you. I know, like, I just know how many times you've used this card all throughout our website, but please make it happen. And you're in the back of your mind, you're like, well, shit, I designed all this for scalability, right? This is all future proof. So you're like, all right, let me go fix it up. So what do they want? They want the marker color to be the website's accent color. Done. They want the gap, or they want the columns to be 1 instead of 2. Hey, no problem. Remove, save, and then look at this. I'm going to refresh, and there it is. Accent color. Let me get out of mobile mode here, and let me zoom back to normal. Oh, hold on. I'm trying to open things. Oh, what's going on? Oh, all right. I'm already zoomed out. All right. Anyway, here's that card. Look, 1 column, accent color on your markers. Now I scroll down and check the other one. It's exactly the same, right? Because I gave myself the opportunity to have global control over this component. And it doesn't matter if there's 1 of these, 2 of these, or 5,000 of these cards across the website. I can control all of them from 1 source of truth. That you have to be doing this stuff. You have to be thinking about this stuff, or you're going to be living an absolute nightmare when clients come back and say that they need to be changing things. And you've done it 700 times manually, and there's no global control. There's no source of truth for that component. All right, just wanted to make that point. All right, so now let's take a look. Whew, that was a lot. But now we're going to take a look at this section and this section. And I also want to show you how to rule the columns, and you can control gaps, but we need to talk about utility classes now. And by the way, 3 columns, right? So if we're going to create utility classes are only helpful if they're created properly, and if you kind of think about all scenarios, and if you create them with like true granular control. So we're going to tackle this up here first because this is probably going to be the easier one. And there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, I make my own utility classes, right? Or I don't understand the benefit of utility classes. Why would somebody use utility classes? Well, you're going to see 2 things here as we go through this. One, you're going to see the tremendous benefit of them and how they make life so much faster and easier and more consistent. But 2, you're going to see the actual work and thought that has to go into them to create them properly and make them truly scalable and functional and granular. So let's do this. Let's first come up with a naming convention for our utility classes. The technique is called columns, right? You're creating text columns. So it makes sense to me to use the word columns for our utility class. So I'm going to start with the first utility class, which is columns _2. And this goes, why are we using the double dash? This goes back to BIM. So if I write columns and then do _2, I'm not going to hit enter yet. Basically what I'm saying is I want columns, and then I want to modify the columns. Remember, block, element, modifier. I want to modify the columns by making 2 of them. Sometimes I want to modify the columns by making 3 of them, or 4 of them, or 5 of them, or 6 of them, right? Or I want to modify the gap, or I want to modify the rule, right? We got to get into all of that. But this is the basics. This is where we start. Columns 2. All right, so I'm going to add that class, columns 2, to this. Now, the class doesn't exist yet. We've got to make the class. Now, you can make the classes slowly over time as you need them, or you can just decide, hey, I'm going to make them all up front so that they're all accessible to me and I don't really have to think about it again. Either way is up to you, or you can just get a framework like ACSS. It's handed to you on a silver platter. Everything already exists and you don't have to think about it. It's just there when you need it, okay? So we're going to take a look at what this requires to create these manually. I'm going to hit an add style sheet, and I'm going to create a style sheet called utility. And then I am going to do what I did on my other style sheet, which is I'm going to put Kevin Geary and I'm going to put Digital Gravy. And then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to write that these are columns utility classes. Now I'm ready to go. So I've denoted what's going on here. It's not just adding random CSS. And I want to start by adding the first one that we've added, which is columns 2. Now here's the thing with utility classes. If you're going to create your own, don't combine styles into the same utility class. It's not utility. Utility is one class for one style, okay? So I would do column count 2 on here. And you can see right away my paragraph just broke into 2 columns. But what if I want to control the gap, okay? Well, I got to come down here, and oftentimes what I'll do now is I'll say, well, this is a big like section. So I'll put 3 in here, and then I'll come down and I can do 2 or 1, but I'll do column gaps. And then all the gaps go under here. So what do I want to do here? I'm going to do columns. So I don't want to use gap because I've already, the gap for Flexbox, gap for grid. Fun fact, gap does, I'm just going to put this here for a second so you can see it. The same gap from Flex and grid works on columns, kind of, okay? Check this out. 2M, it just changed the gap over there. But I want you to see something. CanIUse.com. I was looking at this earlier and I was like, gap. And if you look at gap property for Flexbox, you have 87% support, which is, by the way, why I don't use that very much at all yet. Gap property in grid layout, ooh, better support, 91. It's actually 91.82 if you use some browser prefixes. There's Flex layout, right, which is the same. But here you go, gap supported in multi-column layout, 74%. So yeah, it works in my browser because I have a latest version of Firefox or whatever, but this is not good global support at all. So it would probably be a mistake to just use gap to control your columns, because in a lot of browsers, it appears they're not going to see the gap that you're trying to put on there. So we really need to use the column gap properly, which means we need different, did I say properly? The column gap property, which probably means we need column gap classes. So I'm going to say column gap, and you could even do columns gap if you wanted it to like equally match this. I think I might do that, even though it's like, oh, see, these decisions, right? These are tough decisions to make. So now I can't use numbers here either. I'm going to have to decide like what's going to be small, what's going to be medium, what's going to be large, what's going to be extra large, and so on. So I can start with an XS gap, right? And then I'm going to need, and we're going to do, here's another question that you're going to have, right? So we'll do column gap here. And what's my excess going to be? And am I going to use ims? Am I going to use rims? Am I going to use clamp? Am I going to use some other relative like a min max? What am I going to use? These are decisions that you have to come up with if you're creating your own utility classes. And then how am I going to decide how much gap there is from one size to the next? Am I going to follow some sort of mathematical scale? Am I going to make it random? If I follow the mathematical scale, how do I actually compute them? How do I make this all scalable and easy to maintain? There's a lot of decisions that go into this stuff. So maybe XS is 0.25 M or something. I really don't know. We're just kind of doing random shit here. So S is going to be 0.5. M is going to be 1, which I believe is the default anyway. And then we're going to copy and paste again. And by the way, you see I'm doing a lot of copy paste, a lot of room for error here. Maybe this is 1.5 M. I would not recommend, if you're going to create your own utility classes, I would not recommend creating them in CSS. If you're going to do utility classes, you should learn Sass. Sass is beast mode for utility classes. It really, really is a game changer. So you want to consider that as well. This is very, very hard to maintain in just raw CSS. All right, so I've created a bunch of columns gap classes, and now I'm free to come over here and say columns gap double dash, and let's try XL. And you see that we get an XL gap in between. Now, I'm going to go ahead and hit save. You're going to see a problem here. What about mobile responsiveness? Because we're creating utility classes. In utility classes, I can't do the trick of saying column width and then choosing what my column width is going to be. So what I would actually rather do is kind of manually determine, because you've got to think of all use cases here, manually determine when columns break from one set to the next. And in order to do that, we would need additional classes for our breakpoints, and we would need to use media queries. So it would look like this. First, we would decide that we're going to have 3 available to us. So I'm going to make 3 here as well. And I'm going to make 4 available to us. And that's it. We're just going to, because to keep things simple, we're going to say 2, 3, and 4. But now what we need to do is come down here and say, we're going to say XL breakpoint, right? So with the XL breakpoint, we need to write a media query. This is going to be at media, and we're going to do max width, and it's going to be equal to this first breakpoint, which is 1280 pixels. Then I'm going to copy all of these and paste them. I've got to fix my spacing. This is why you should not manage this stuff in CSS. This should be done in Sass, but I'm just showing you because the people are like, I create my own utility classes. Well, there's a little bit that goes into it, you know? So this is going to be columns XL2, and I'll show you exactly what happens here. XL3 and XL4. Perfect. Now I'm not done. I've got to do the next breakpoint down. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to do the L breakpoint, and this is going to be L2, L3, and L4, and this is going to be the next one down, which is 992. And then I'm going to do an M breakpoint, and I'm going to do M2, M3, M4, and then I'm going to do 768. Okay, and then I'm going to do an S breakpoint. And this is going to give me control over the number of columns at every single breakpoint that exists. Of course, you also run into a scalability issue here with your framework in general when you're not using Sass, because you can't put variables in the breakpoint. So if your breakpoints ever change, you got to find all your media queries and you got to change them all manually. Except when you're using Sass, you can use variables in your breakpoints. So that's another little tidbit there. All right, so at the S breakpoint, we want that to be 480. All right, perfect. And we got S2, S3, S4. Oh, we're missing something huge. We're missing a 1. We can never break this to 1 because we don't have a 1. So here we go. Columns, XL, 1. And then we're going to do column count is 1. I'm going to copy that. I'm going to come down, and here we're going to have L1. And then here we're going to have M1. And there's a lot of room for error when you're doing stuff like this. S1. You got to really kind of pay attention to what you're doing. All right, so now I should have the ability to control my gaps, but I can't control my gaps at breakpoints because we would have to do all of that breakpoint stuff again for the gaps. But that's fine. That's probably not that important. I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And then what I'm going to do is come here, and I'm going to say that at the M breakpoint, I want columns M, that's a double dash, by the way, columns M1. So I have columns 2 and columns M1, which means at the M breakpoint, this should break to 1 column. And it does not. What is going on? Did we make a mistake in our utility classes? So now what we have to do is we have to figure this out. So we're going to come here. Let me zoom all the way out. So we have 2. Are we ever breaking to 1? We're never breaking to 1. So something is absolutely wrong. So we're going to go look at our M. We have columns 2. It sets column count to 2. M breakpoint at 768. Columns M1. Ah, look at that. We did. There you go. There's no double dash there. Now it's working. So now I have to come in and make sure I've double dashed all my 1 classes. See? You start copying and pasting. You're trying to do a lot of things with this utility framework you're trying to build out. Make a little typo mistake. Suddenly things are not working. Okay, so now we've got this working. Now, some of you are like, man, this is a lot of work. But think about this. Number 1, it can be handed to you on a silver platter, right? You buy a framework. Or 2, you create this once for the one site you're working on, and then you use this on all your next sites in the future. And so next time you load a site, it's already there. It's available to you. Now with a framework like ACSS, you're going to have the ability to turn on and off certain things that you don't want to ever use. If you're like, I'm never going to use these column things, just turn them off and then they don't show up in your code and you don't have the bloat. So you're good to go. All right. So if we did not have those classes on here, this is what we started with. Now, for those of you who are like, okay, let me make sure we're still zoomed in correctly. All right, we are. So for those of you who are like, what is the benefit of utility classes? Like, how do they make your life easier? How do they make your life faster? Well, check this. You're designing a page. The classes are already available to you. You hit this and you say, you know what? I need 2 columns here. Bam. And then on a mobile breakpoint like I want 1 column. And then you move on with your life. It's done. You see how fast that was? It's done. And if you didn't know how to do this technique, but you knew the classes existed, you can still do it, right? It's not unavailable to you. Same thing with like grid. If you wanted to create a grid and you don't know how to write CSS grid, but you know the utility classes exist, well, you can just pop the utility classes on and you're good to go. You're done. You got a grid. So very, very useful, very powerful, and very quick. Now I come down here and we're going to see if it works for us down here. Remember, they should be available to me. Columns 3. Look at that. Columns, gap. Let's do XL again. Bam, there's my XL gap. Look how fast I'm moving because I have the utility classes available to me. But there's one thing that's not available to me. Oh, by the way, let's do mobile real quick. So on L, I want it to be 2. So I'm going to do columns, L, 2. And then I'm going to do columns, L, no, not L, M, 1. Okay, perfect. All right, so now that should be perfectly responsive, but we need to add something. But we can check on our responsiveness real quick just to see if we are good to go. So there's our 3. There's our 2. And there's our 1. So bam, pop 3 utility classes on there. We've got 3 columns with a gap that we like, and it's all perfectly responsive right out of the box. Okay, we want to add one more feature. We want column rule. Check this out. So we're going to go to utility and we're going to check on our, just for now, because this is 3 columns and we can see it, I'm going to add this column rule, and we're going to do let's do 0.15 rem white. Okay, solid white. There you go. So now we have, look at what it just did. Let me look on the front end so you guys can see. And refresh. Perfect. Look, I've got ruled columns now. And it respects my gap. It puts those rules right in the center of my gap. And what's amazing about this, even more amazing, the rule disappears as the column breaks down. Look, there's only 1 rule now. It knows when there's no 3rd column, I don't need that extra rule. If you were trying to use borders or pseudo elements or something like that, you would have to manually add and then manually remove at different breakpoints the ruler. But the ruler in this technique is automatic, and it just shows up and it leaves when it's supposed to. It's awesome. But obviously we don't want this giant white one here, right? So we really got to think about how we're going to do this with utility classes. So I'm going to do, and this is actually really tough. And I haven't added this to automatic CSS yet. How are we going to do this? Because if you look at column rule, oops, first of all, let me zoom back in. Column rule. So let's play around with this and let's just see if we could actually layer. I don't even know this, honestly. I'm doing this like live with you. I don't even know if we can layer these, but let's see if we can. So we would have something like columns rule, and then let's try primary and just see if we can have all right, so you do column rule, and then let's just see if we can add a color by itself. And then we would also need, all right, so we'll need column rule colors, and then we'll need, or actually they can all use, okay. Let's do something like this, where we do root, and then we create a variable called rule width. And then we do something like 1m, or no, let's do 0.15 rem to start out with. And then we can do var, so column rule, we always use the same rule width, right? We do rule width, and then the color, okay. This is where we're going to see if we can layer things. Okay, var primary. So we have the rule width of 0.15 rim, and the color is primary. So if we just do columns rule primary, let's see if we get anything. And we don't. It doesn't look like we do. Okay. No, I'm not seeing anything in there. So what if I change this to... Oh, okay. There's got to be the type of rule, right? Okay. So we could do something like rule type and do solid. And then in here we can do, so we would always need like we would need to choose up front. Like it's always going to be solid and it's always going to be this width. So you wouldn't be able to change it per set of columns, but at least this is getting us started in the right direction. So we would need rule type right here. And so you see it's working. Okay, perfect. So now if I ever wanted to change this to dotted, all my rules would become dotted, right? Which is cool. If I ever wanted to change it to 0.1 rim, they would all become 0.1 rim. Pretty cool. So I have like global control somewhat over my rule width and my rule type. And then I'm just changing the color based on what I'm using here. So I could do columns rule, and then I could do base light, something like this. It would help if I added a class here. And then I can do column rule, and then same thing. Actually, let me just copy all this, and then I'm going to paste it. And I'm going to say that this is going to be base light. Okay. And then if I remove my primary class over here, so I might be moving a little fast now. Columns, rule, base light. It helps when they're available in the dropdown. Look at that. But I don't know. Base light's not the way I want to go. I was trying to make so I was thinking in the wrong direction. It really needs to be base dark probably. So let's do columns, rule, base dark. And that's going to give us our base dark color. So I'm going to grab this and make a new one. Right now, there's no organization to this, but I'm just getting things that work. So you guys can see how this, now we have like a subtle columns ruler. And these are just, I'm using variables from automatic CSS so you guys can see, right? So now I have a very subtle ruler, which actually looks really good. Now, if I wanted to create all the classes for all my colors, I would need my primary for all my shades, my secondary, my accent, my base, and then all of the normal black-white shades, right? So I would have to do a lot of additional work. I want you guys to see what goes into creating my own framework, right? And this, guys, is for one technique. It's not for an entire framework that's logically and intelligently laid out with mathematical typography and spacing and clamps and fallbacks and everything else that's going on. It's a lot of work, right? Not saying you can't do it or that you shouldn't do it. I mean, more power to you. One thing you have to weigh is like the cost. Like automatic CSS is $99 a year. I've spent more than $99 doing this one training for you guys, and we ain't anywhere with a framework, right? We're haphazardly creating some column shit. Like we're not even like, this is not anywhere near like a comprehensive utility classes of any sort. So, and it's all done in vanilla CSS, which is awful. So there's just a lot to think about. I want you guys to see what goes into it. So anytime you can have something so powerful like this handed to you on a silver platter, to me, it's a no-brainer. And to a lot of other people, it's a no-brainer too. But I want you guys to actually see what goes into it, because I think that is helpful for you. But yeah, you get the gist now of like when to use custom classes. Let me go back to camera here. When to use custom classes, how to name your custom classes, why we use custom classes, utility classes, when to use those, how to create them if you want to start to create them on your own, what really goes into it, all the things that you have to think about. There's a lot here. Please don't look at tutorials and think, oh, I'm just going to steal this quick concept and I'm going to throw it in on the ID level and I'm going to move on with my life. Like, you're not doing dev. You're doing copy and paste nonsense. Dev is thinking about the future, thinking about scalability, thinking about being organized, thinking about workflow, thinking about working in teams, okay? Thinking about making stuff as future-proof and as like tightened up as you can possibly get it. That is getting better at dev. And that's why in my tutorials, you're going to see that I don't just teach the technique, right? Sometimes I teach the wrong technique, then I show you the right technique. Sometimes I talk a lot about best practices and scalability and future-proofing and IDs versus custom classes and all this other stuff. And some people comment and they're like, Kevin, stop talking so much. Just show us the technique. But it's like, I don't want to just give you fish. I want to teach you how to fish, because then you can go off and actually do really good work. And you're not going to get in a situation. Here's the thing. I never want you to get into a situation where you follow one of my tutorials and you've built an entire website with one of my tutorials, and then the client comes along and they're like, oh, we got to change some things. And you're like, oh my God, I can't. I just copied and pasted code that I saw on YouTube, and things have gone wrong. I wish somebody had told me, right? I wish somebody had told me to do it this way instead of that way. I wish somebody had told me to use this instead of that. And so I think that is very, very important. I never want to get you in a situation where you're like, Kevin, you should have told me. Now, sometimes that's going to be inevitable because I'm not perfect, right? I don't know everything. So I might teach something and then I might change my mind 6 months later. And I might decide, hey, there's a better way to do this. What I can promise you is that 6 months later, if I find a better way to do it, I'll do another video and I'll say, hey, 6 months ago, I taught it this way. Now I would recommend to do it this way. And here's why. And trust me, there's parts of my websites that it's like, God, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? This is not done the way that I would do it now. Because we all get better, we all grow, right? And that's just part of the process. By the way, CSS is always changing. These techniques are evolving. And so there's just naturally, you've got to get comfortable with this stuff happening. But don't blatantly just be going around copying and pasting techniques that you saw and not thinking at all about IDs and classes and custom classes and utility classes and scalability and future proofing and workflow and best practices. Please, please, the most important thing to be thinking about at all times during these things is workflow and best practices and scalability and future proofing. Okay. All right. I'm getting off my soapbox now. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. If you found this helpful, hit the like button, hit subscribe, hit the bell notification, drop comments below. And I know this is going to it's going to get on your nerves. It's going to get on your nerves. You start to watch other tutorials and they're just like, pixel this, pixel that, drag and drop, da, 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 da. And there's no talk about like, whoa, wait, what? That's not going to be equal to anything else you're doing on the website. And there's no consistency there. There's no future proofing there. There's no scalability there. I want those red flags to start popping into your mind because that means you're getting it. You're getting it. And when you're building your own sites, as you're building, those red flags are going to pop into your own mind like, shit, I got to stop and I got to make this scalable. I got to make this future proof. I got to do better with my workflow and my organization. Okay. All right. That's it. I'm out. Drop comments, drop likes. I'll see you guys back very, very soon. Peace.